really looks at where are our biggest risks with consideration for social vulnerable populations, and then where do we each have a role to play. And we look at it at a watershed scale, and then we go into the neighborhood and work with the community to build resiliency.
Okay, let's talk about nature-based green and gray infrastructure. What is that role in your in the work that you do?
Right. So wetlands play a significant role in soaking up water. They're like a sponge, and so they can reduce the flooding that goes down into our rivers and reduce. So we really want to protect those. We also want to protect forests. That also helps to reduce the runoff off the surface. There's also engineering techniques called green infrastructure. So you may have seen green roofs or ditches with gardens in them. Those again are helping to absorb and soak up the water so it doesn't run and create flooding. So those are the techniques we're trying to use in the urban centers because there's very little room to put in conventional gray infrastructure.
This is the same concept as sponge cities?
That's right. It's the same concept. And so the more we can mimic nature, the more resilient we are from a disaster perspective, but also an environmental perspective.
So in your few days here at the conference, I'm sure you've met many Asia-Pacific delegates.
Yes.
What are the, I mean, obviously flooding is a very common theme here. What were the lessons or the highlights from your talks?
I think one of the interesting things is that we're all coming to the same conclusion. We're all saying we have to take lessons from nature. We have to try and mimic nature in our urban settings to improve resiliency. The other key message is not forgetting our social vulnerable population. That's why we're here, right? They require more social services, more healthcare services and emergency management. Much more difficult for them to recuperate from a flood. And so I think one of the interesting takeaways for me is that we're all coming to the same conclusion and we can all exchange ideas on what worked, what didn't work, and how can we all build capacity.
One of the lessons I learned also here was that in many communities and areas, there's still a need to build capacity on data.
Yes.
You know, on building data about the
Yes.
capacities of the communities to absorb these threats that are facing.
Data is a critical component to not just environmental management, but disaster resiliency. It really directs us and allows us, after a flood, to understand it, what happened, what went wrong, why did something flood? But it also helps us direct the future, where we need to go, where we need to target our efforts. The trouble with data is that a lot of times we want instantaneous answers, and we have to take time to analyze it. A lot of times we also think that it's a nice to do, but not a have to do. But really it's a part of risk management. It informs our decision making so that we can make sure that our vulnerable populations are safe.
Okay. The technology that you developed, is that transferable to other countries?
Yes, it is. It's something that we're hoping with funding to allow other municipalities and communities to use. When we developed the tool, we didn't just develop it for the Credit River watershed. We actually engaged municipalities across Canada to understand what their data availability is, what information they have. We collected damage costs from them. So we've had quite a bit of interest in Canada and here in our discussions here in the Philippines about the tool. And so we hope to share it.
Oh, wonderful. Is this something that that can only be done by the government, or are you also looking for private partnerships?
Private partnerships are extremely important. We actually received funding from RBC, Nature Tech Foundation. The banking and financial institutions, the development community are all very interested because there's a legal risk and liability and reputational risk for them as well. They don't want to see flooded properties and infrastructure either. So private sector plays an important role in disaster mitigation.
Okay. Today's theme is gender inclusivity, and How do you think your work, especially in developing the tool, has addressed the needs of the vulnerable and those who need representation?
So the tool actually was conceived or inspired because after the 2013 flood, we sat down with the community, we sat down with public health, we sat down with social services and listened to their stories. And it touched me. It still touches me now when I think of the different impacts that people suffered during the flood. And so part of the tool is looking at the demographics and looking at social vulnerable populations. So women, single families, immigrants, low-income families, senior citizens, all are more vulnerable during a flood and evacuating, but also recuperating from that flood. And so the tool uses census data, and we overlay it on all of the mapping that we have so that it informs every decision we make.
Very interesting. We're seeing that a lot in the news now, especially even in the United States. The storms are more frequent and they're bigger, and it really does affect the most vulnerable,
Yes.
the elderly, the women, children. What are the lessons you think that we can all learn from regarding this?
I think one of the things that I have taken in for my own personal experience is that as engineers, we get very excited about infrastructure. We get into the data, and we need to recognize that what we do is for the social vulnerable populations, right? And so I think one of the things that has been most important and informative is when we work together. So when we have social services and public health telling emergency managers their story to help inform their preparedness planning, going into the community to understand what their risks are so that we can better improve our approaches, whether that's in outreach and communication or whether that's in green infrastructure to prevent the disaster. I think one of the things that we've learned is language is so critical. Many times we have said, oh, this was an extreme event, a 1% chance of happening, and then we had another storm event a month later. And so a lot of people thought, oh, 1% chance of happening, I don't need to do anything to reduce risk. And then it happened again. So understanding language, I think, is very important, and connecting with people on an emotional level so that we can change behaviors.
Reminds me of what happened in the Philippines. We used to have our storm warning signal was based on the strength of the storm, but now we have warning signals for flood risk, and this is given through the cell phones.
Yes.
For the phone companies, and
Yes.
they warn people your
Yes.
area might be flooded because of, and it's not anymore so directly related to the strength of the storm, but basically the hazards
Yes.
in your locality.
That is a great example. One of the things that I think has been really transformative is social media. We have been getting a lot more flood complaints via social media than the phone call. And also videos, which is great for us to collect that data and to say, okay, yes, our models are predicting that this area is flooded, and we're seeing the video information to let us know that that is happening. So yes, absolutely. I think one of the other things that we're finding is because these events are so extreme, we can't go out into the field during these extreme events to monitor them physically. So we're using drones or we're using cameras to diagnose where there's extreme flooding.
Wow, so that's technology.
Technology has been a great tool for us.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay, let's just go back to one of the things that is mentioned here in your work. Your tool also supports public health target emergency planning.
Yes. One of the things that we found was low-income families were not throwing out food that had been contaminated by flooded waters, and they were getting waterborne illnesses. That really touched us. And so we worked with Health Canada and the University of Guelph to develop an aspect of the risk tool to allow us to identify where we might see pathogens so that we can, again, work with public health and outreach to try and engage people, also to give social support, shelters, replacement food, so that people don't have waterborne illnesses.
Where can we see this tool?
The tool is going to be released in early 2025, and we are hoping to develop training for people and practitioners. Again, we're hoping to get funding to help us provide support to practitioners to use the tool.
Is it mostly for policymakers and practitioners, or is it a public?
Well, the nice part
mechanism?
about the tool is it's spatial.
Okay.
So, you could see your home and
wow.
see what your flood risk is so that you can make an informed decision. So that's the nice part of the tool. The other nice part of the tool is that it's actually a financial tool. So it allows you to say, if I invest today, here's my payback tomorrow, right? And here's where I can reduce risk. So it's been a tool to help us explain risk to multiple stakeholders.
Wow, that's so interesting. I'd like to see that. So if you were to partner with, or to have a collaboration with other countries or communities in the Asia Pacific, how do they start?
Well, that's a good question. I think what I'd like to do is ask those communities in other countries, what are their risks? What are they seeing in the ground with respect to social vulnerable populations? What information and data do they have? The tool is built for municipalities that have data, but also those municipalities that don't have data. So we have different features. And so really getting to know and understand what data is available, we can then tailor the tool to help support them.
Okay, where are you at now? So you're going to release your tool, but you've just had a big flood in your locality. What does it look like in the next few years for your organization?
So we've been using the tool actually to help us identify where we need to prioritize cleanup, where we need to prioritize emergency planning and outreach and preventative measures. That's been our focus, but obviously we're hoping for, again, those partners that we mentioned, like RBC, the federal government, provincial government, to give us the support that we can extend the tool to others outside of our watershed.
Thank you, wow. And we're halfway through the conference. What else are you looking forward to?
I have to say, I've just been enjoying every day and every moment, and meeting the wonderful people in the Philippines. They've been so friendly and inviting and enthusiastic, and I think it's been such a great opportunity for me to learn from them. So I'm excited to hear more about risk communication and the different ways in which we can engage people.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to that as well. Well, thank you so much, Christine Zimmer, Chief Watershed Specialist of the Credit Valley Conservation Authority. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, that was so interesting.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. So do we
Great
get to see
questions.
that? I was just like, what else?